came to terms with a thinning head of hair.
Oh,
So I took her down. I'm just like, well, I got convinced.
nice. I can't see you though. Like you're just a dot on this.
Well, that's okay. Yeah. All right. Oh, we'll wait for Jim to get in.
Are we recording yet? Not yet.
Yes, we are.
We are. Okay. So don't be too silly is what we're saying.
All right. So it is 5:31, January 4th, 2023. Woohoo. And we're going to bring the Finance and Budget Committee meeting to order. First item on the agenda, and the only item on the agenda, is the spring 2023 referendum information and recommendation. Angela, if you would like to kick it off.
Okay. Yes, I've worked to answer some follow-up questions that we had at the last Finance and Budget Committee meeting, especially pertaining to staffing and to mill rate impact. And put together just 3 scenarios that, show like especially a change with mill rate and with different equalized value. I can get into that in a little bit, but just to help you guys understand a little bit of what goes into the scenarios and just through discussions that happened today. When the scenarios are built within the budget model, I essentially use like a framework of the budget of our current budgets and projecting it forward for all areas. So when I went through and projected both or made adjustments for both revenues and expenditures in our budgets, they took away all ESSER revenues and then any of the ESSER expenditures that weren't agreed upon to roll forward. Okay. So the amount of expenditures as far as staffing were concerned for ESSER that came off were $500,000 for existing positions that are, were essentially planned for through ESSER. We had more positions planned for originally, but what happened in some cases is those staff members were hired for last year as an example in some cases, and then they resigned and their positions weren't filled this year. So we had some of that, so that you may be like, well, I thought we we're talking more around $1 million and now it's 500,000. Why is that? That's why. Okay. So we had some adjustments with that. We were very cautious when we put this year's budget together to, instead of giving all of the increase in a form that would roll forward, we did 3%, and the CPI was 4.7%, okay? We did a 3% increase, and we gave what was around $1 million in stipends. And that amount is taken out of the expenditures for future years, okay? So that was done specifically in an effort to protect the district financially, to ensure that the amounts rolling forward there was less of an impact. Additionally, in the budget that was assembled for the projections, the debt service payment of $1 million was taken out. So we would not renew that. We would essentially absorb that within the budgets. The most challenging piece, and I apologize if I didn't explain it clear enough or mention really much of it at all within the memo, was that we're really very, very dependent upon per pupil aid increases through the state. It's huge. Okay, so what happened in the last 2 years in this current biennium budget is we received no per pupil increase. Okay, so the governor and the state would talk about, okay, we've increased aid, we've increased aid for schools, but really when you have your revenue limit, let's say your revenue limit is 10, okay, we'll just use it very simple terms. They didn't change the revenue limit from a per pupil standpoint and say, now your revenue limit's 11. They just said, we're going to give you more state aid, and that lowered the amount that the taxpayers had to pay. So that was, we've talked about that several times in other meetings, but that's an important element to keep in mind here. So what's happened in effect is the state had said to districts, we're not giving you more revenue per pupil. You have to balance on your ESSER funding. And as we all know, it's never wise, you know, Jim and I have many conversations about this. It's never wise to budget ongoing future expenses on one-time revenues. And then the very unfortunate reality that we're in right now is that, you know, we gave a 1.23% increase to our staff and a 3% increase. And right now districts are looking to do around 4%, 5% next year. And CPI is 8%, you know, so that's even trying to manage the middle of that. And it really puts us in a tight spot where, you know, inflationary increases, especially outside of taking out the loss in revenues, really put the district in a spot where we need to go to the voters for a referendum. Often I think about when I approach this, what were the goals and the feedback of the strategic plan? Okay, so, you know, I think about the fact that we want to make sure that we're supporting our staff, you know, and compensating them well, you know, and comparable to competing districts, and just offer and honor them with that. You know, we have to be fiscally conservative, but we also have to compete with neighboring districts who, you know, the job market is totally different from what it was even 2 years ago. So I just wanted to mention, you know, I didn't draw that out specifically in here, but those pieces are in here. And yesterday specifically, you know, was trying to find a way, because we haven't talked real specifically in the district in the past and using a real defined formula for FTE and for like a student to teacher ratio. And that's where districts can look and address declining enrollment. Is one way. Okay, the biggest thing to think about with declining enrollment always is the fact that when you lose X number of students, it doesn't mean they're all coming out of the same grade, the same pack, in the same area. So that makes it additionally challenging whenever you talk about enrollment, because it's not, you have to look at it systemically instead of just saying, oh, we're just gonna, you know, we're like a business could say, we're gonna stop making this product and then we're gonna push our focus in this area. We can't do that. We have to look at the whole system. So in studying the Baird information, just in the analytics that we have, we were looking at the comparables to other districts. You'd asked me to look at FTE comparables the last meeting. And, you know, when I look at our student to teacher ratio, we're at about 12.19 in other districts, you know, even with higher achieving test scores are at 13, 14 at times. So then it's kind of like unpacking, well, what does that really mean from a data perspective? And we were looking at that, Jamie and I and Jim had looked at that yesterday and talked with Mike a little bit about it as well. But, you know, really, if we look at what we have for staffing right now, if we were to move to even just to increase that amount a little bit, to start chipping away at it and be a little more focused, it would be reducing the equivalent to $700,000 in next year's budgets. Okay, to kind of, you know, leverage us to that point, in addition to the loss of the ESSER funding position. So I want to be clear, if that's about $500,000, and then it would be $700,000 with these adjustments. You know, with the change in all of the in the restructuring, where that fits into the big picture, is there may be ways, you know, I hesitate to say be in this kind of a position, all teaching positions or all this kind of position, because there may be other ways that gets restructured, but that's like the equivalent amount that we would work towards, you know. And really to move it in that direction, we would have to adjust the teaching staff, but there's other ways we could adjust staffing as well. So the other additions to the referendum scenarios were the 4 items: the technology, infrastructure, and device replacement, buildings and grounds amounts, and then curriculum and instruction cycle and implementation plans. You know, as we look at, you know, we've talked about the technology device replacement plan on a regular basis, because we don't have a permanent amount in our budget for replacing devices. So we are using, you know, we're moving other things in the budget in order to make those things happen on a regular basis. And just like we approved in August, replacing all teacher laptops using ESSER money. We had one-time funding for that at that time, but we won't have that in the future. So we're trying to be more methodical and planned out with what we are putting forth for the recommendation. The buildings and grounds, I've been working with Chris Dupree. He has a very defined list that we would use when we would go out to voters if we move forward with this, to say exactly what the projects are that we would tackle with this. Curriculum and instruction, cycle planning, there's always our costs for working on any kind of curriculum and instruction cycle. There's costs to that, and we're working towards, Jamie's working hard with her team to figure out a more focused and planned out cycle for implementing new curriculum, because that's another piece where we don't have that permanently built into our budget. So what I did when I approached making the scenarios is I took those things, I built those into that budget. You put those numbers into that, and then it gives you kind of the draft of what it is. Then there are other things I need to adjust to give us sort of the ballpark number and of how it would impact voters. So our equalized value of our land went up 16.9% last year. So there was one sheet I put in the packet that showed the historic equalized value history of the district. It's never gone up that much. And then, so I tried to look at, years of recession, we could be heading into a recession. So what happened to equalized value around that time? Where was it at? What was the average? The historical overall average was 3.71. So what I did to be cautious in what we communicate to our voters, because we care very deeply about that, is to put it at 0 for next year. And then I put it at, I changed with different scenarios, but like in the scenario with the recommendation I had, I put it at 0% for the first year, 1%, and then 2% the following 3 years. So what that means, in essence, for voters is if the equalized value goes up, the mill rate would go down, as long as the revenue limit overall would stay steady. We don't know what the governor is going to do in the biennium budget, so we put $200 in for the first 2 years, because that's likely to be that, $100 in year 3 and $50 in the last 2 years. Trying to pad it for the unknown. We don't know what revenue we're going to get from the state. The other aid is categorical aid. The biggest difference between those two is that categorical aid is more aid we get from the state, but does not impact the mill rate levy or any of that. Okay, it's just additional aid per student. And they often do that to lessen the impact on voters through the revenue limit. So, as I mentioned already, they did the mill rate projections and then the movement towards a more defined FTE staffing formula. So so when you look at trying to think of which page it is. In your packet, page 8, scenario 1 would be the recommended amounts that I would have for the referendum. They would put for 2023, increasing $5.2 million to $9.5 million, then 11 million, 13, or 11 million in 24, 25, 25, 26 would be 13 million, 15 million in 26, 27, and 17.5 in 27, 28. The amounts above that, where it shows where our revenues and expenditures would be, reflect if that amount is the amount we get in revenue, additional revenue in the revenue limit through a past non-recurring operational referendum. So if you look especially at the Fund 10 revenues, our revenues this year are at $7.6 million. What I've modeled in the budget and planned for would be that they would go down to 7.1 next year. It would only go down to that amount if we get the additional amount, the additional 5.2 on the revenue limits.
You said, excuse me, on the scenarios, Fund 10 revenues would be at 7.6 million or 7.2?
They're 7.6 this year. They would go down a little under 500,000 next year, but that would even be just if we have.
You mean 72.6, right? Because you're saying 70 76.
72,600,000.
Okay, all right, sorry. I
And
just
then
didn't
it's
clarification.
this year, and then they're going down. So we have the fiscal cliff, we have the thing, so that includes the projection, the increase, the inflationary impact, the amounts, the $1.4 million for the technology, buildings and grounds curriculum. And it just includes those items within, and it also took up the expense.
Sorry, guys.
It's okay.
So on that, when I looked at the overall impact, I mean, it was almost not a full % that the revenues were dropping, but it was close to that. Also with the expenditures, they were dropping about $500,000 as well. You'll see in all of the years of the projected budget that the surplus deficit leaves room for inflationary impact. So when I projected ahead, I included a 10% increase for healthcare, 2% for transportation. And what I did for the staff increases was 5% for this next year, then 3% and 2% in the last years. Because the forecast for that and what others are feeling at this point is that will go down. CPI will come down again likely, but it'll take a year or two. So the mill rate, which is, the total tax levy is $18,300,000 this year, would go up to $23,900 the following year. And, in essence, because the state has not funded, the increase in per pupil funding over these years, our only way to finance this is going to the voters for a referendum. We can certainly, the thing that Colin and I have talked about several times is that, let's say we would pass the referendum amounts and we would find that we did not need as much of the revenue. The board can always decide to under levy. That is always in the power of the board. But what we can't do is go back all of a sudden and say, oh, well, shoot, we really messed up. We really needed more. Like, we can't do that. So we would just be using fund balance. The projections I put in here keep our fund balance relatively steady, which is important for the health of the district. There are times where we've already talked, we may need to dip into fund balance for the future, like looking at our OPEB benefits. That's one item, but that hasn't even figured into here. So it's a lot. The estimated, if we were to have a 0% increase in the equalized value of land, we'd be going back up to a mill rate of $7.20 next year. If we were to go to have like a 2% increase straight across for the next 5 years, the mill rate would go down to $7.06 next year, and then $6.93 in the last year. Over the course of the 5 years, we would be looking at mill rate in the $8 range. I am optimistic, though, that would likely be lower, and we would be closer to the $7 range. We just don't know what happens with equalized value this far out. We're just looking into a crystal ball and giving our best guess. So,
let's just play this out hypothetically, and I'd like to simplify this a little bit, just for my own understanding. Let's just say we bring this to the public and they're like, yeah, they vote to pass it, right, for the amounts that we have on here. How would that impact the average taxpayer in this community? Is there any way that we can quantify that? Like, if you have a house that's like $100,000, right?
Yes.
How much more are you paying out of your pocket per year if this goes?
So for next year, it'd be about $1.69, I believe I had per thousand. So like when I say $7.20, that's $7.20 per thousand value. So if it's so right now we're down to $5.51, which is historically low. So that's where that's where they would see an increase. You know, we wouldn't be able to deny that at all. That's the truth, you know. However, the community's historical investment in education has been well over $8, and it's still way low compared. And where most districts also have, you know, other referendum, you know, levies on top of that, we just have our operational. So our mill rate still compared to other districts is quite low. I think Reidsville is the only district underneath us currently. And the other districts go up to as far as $9. So I mean, that's
So
from,
they're not to cut you off, but
no, you're fine.
$1.69 per thousand more, is that
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
So then instead of it being, say it's 100,000 like he was suggesting, instead of it being $551 on a $100,000 home, it would then be on, like, take for example, scenario 1 would be $720. Scenario 2 would be 706,
Mhm.
and scenario 3 would be 693.
Mhm.
Fair?
All right, I just want to make sure I'm doing my math right, and I'm not missing something here, but so if you own $100,000 home, if this passes, you're looking at a total taxable change in your about $169, right? Am I doing that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
would that just be for this next year, or is that like every year?
Well, the mill rate would be set at a point, but then as we would increase that, it would go up higher. You know, like we have an increase on the revenue limit with what we're asking for. It's important to note that the last time we did an operational referendum, that we went for $4.3 million. It's right before I came on board and I listened to the meetings. And at that time, the district knew that wasn't enough. They knew that they were going to have deferred maintenance that wasn't going to be addressed. And that was going to sort of, the can was sort of proverbially going to be kicked on down the road more on that. But they felt strong at that time because the mill rate was around $7.80. It was 82 cents that year, I believe. No, $7.81. That was the amount that they can use to hold steady, at least for the next year for sure, that it wouldn't be above the current
Okay.
mill rate.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I'd be curious, so we know what the first year looks like. Is it possible to see what years 2 through 5 would look like?
In this scenario, so the very last line, so in this scenarios, the purple number is $7.20, and then every year you can see where it would go.
So what page is that on?
So it's on page 7 of the scenarios.
8. Page 8.
Oh, is it 8? Okay, I'm sorry, maybe so the first, that's the understanding. I scrolled up to the wrong one. So in the first scenario with a 0% equalized land value increase, and I figured out if we would depreciate like a 0.5%, it'd be like a cent. That's what it came out to. But over the years increasing, if you just follow over to the right, it shows each year what the mill rate would be. So there would be an increase of roughly 40 cents each year with the amounts that we have in there, a little more in the last year. And then on the second scenario, if for chance that it would be around 2% land value, our initial mill rate would be lower, but it would increase about to the same amount, just 2 cents less from $8.50 to $8.48. And then the most likely scenario, our historic average has been around that 3.71%. If you look at 4% over the years, it would be starting at $6.93 all the way up to $8.26. My best educated guess would be that we would likely be over $7 the first year, but not come up as high historically over time. I would think that the equalized value would come up, but there are no guarantees. Sometimes there'd be, 3 years of 3% and then -2%, -1%. So it's.
Well, and one thing that you pointed out too is that the historical was the mill rate being at, like, say, for example, scenario 1, 7.42. This year we took a big
Yeah.
decrease,
Huge, yeah.
a huge giant dip for our current year. So it's going to be looking like a bigger leap when compared to current year versus the year prior.
But it's not even coming up to where it was,
Right.
you know? And then we have to keep in mind too, you know, if we were to consider a capital referendum, that would add some to that as well at some point, but we
Yeah,
have to consider our operational.
and I don't mean to overcomplicate this, but really what I'm trying to do is simplify it, because if we're gonna go to taxpayers and ask for like 65 million bucks or whatever this is over
Yes.
the next 5 years, I think if, that sounds like a lot of money, right? It is a lot of money.
Mhm.
But I think if we break that down into an adjustable number that they could wrap their heads around.
So this is how much it would
How is that gonna
increase.
impact me, right? If I
Correct.
have
Mhm.
a house that's worth, $200,000, that's like $338 on my pocket next year.
And
Right.
Lisa Sink, who does all of our marketing and communications, we can, present facts to our taxpayers. We can't tell them which way to vote. We just say this is,
And I'm not
Based on
suggesting
this.
that, I'm just saying,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
most taxpayers probably don't speak educational finance. So I think
Yes.
if we could,
Mhm.
in the sake of transparency, to the people that fund the district, I would certainly appreciate as a
Mhm.
taxpayer if I just
No.
knew like, hey, what is this gonna cost me? Other than,
Yes.
you see that big number, but, just so you can kind of see how it'll impact you personally. When I look at these numbers, it seems quite reasonable. It's not like, you're looking at like
Mhm.
$170 extra a year. I think that's not gonna, crush most people. But I think it's really just trying to, make that, break it down in layman's terms and then not education finance terms, if that makes sense.
And we could put a range over the years to see what we'd ask for this year too. Yeah.
Hey, Angela, I didn't see this. I just saw this just now as I was looking at one of these graphs. I totally spaced on this to ask you this earlier. Beloit has no revenue limit levies. They're only non-revenue limit levies.
Correct. Yes.
What does that mean?
That means that we don't have any like capital referendum approved debts. So like Fund 39 is, if you have Fund 39 debt, that's a separate levy. So we have just Fund 10 levies. Other districts, will have like their Fund 10 levy, they'll have Fund 39 levy, and they'll have Fund 80, which is community service levy. So those all.
So
a
they have
district-
multiple levies in other districts versus where ours is simply a singular.
One.
And
Correct.
Beloit only operates the same way by having a singular, but they just use a different fund.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes, it's a different fund, different levy. It depends what it's for. So, and then when you look at the mill rate for a district, and that was in one of the graphs, and
It's on page 6 for anybody.
yeah, when you look at some of that, you can see also that what it really ends up being is that some will have their revenue limit levies, which is the basic one, and then the non-revenue limit levies, which could be a 39 and 80, or it could be just one or the other. So we currently don't have a community service fund levy at all, or Fund 39. I think the district paid that off in, I want to say 2018-19. The very tricky part with controlling and sort of managing your mill rate is that if you have Fund 39, you can always, the word is defeats. So let's say we let's say we had it right now and we could have said, okay, we're gonna pull in more, we're gonna levy for more in Fund 39 to keep our mill rate stable and not have an impact and a jolt to voters, because that's hard, when you think, oh gosh, my pocketbook is gonna be hit on this. And sort of the goal to it is you keep it nice and steady, but we don't have any tools available to us to do that. And because we didn't receive additional funding from the state, all we can do is go back to the state for more voters. I mean, I shouldn't say all, we also need to look at our budget, which we have done that, and we have plans for addressing the staffing portions of that, so.
Kathy or any of the other board members not on committee, did anybody else have anything that they wanted to ask about, inquire about? as far as the budget goes.
Yeah, I think, as we're talking, it's great that we're hearing mill rate and all these different things to help us understand. But Angela, my view would be if I was a community member, which I am, there's two things that I care about: how much I actually have to pay, and I want to know where is that money going. So it doesn't matter even, I think we need to maybe break down what a common tax bill looks like, for Kathy Willis or whoever, and what percentage goes towards schools, what goes toward the community, police department. I mean, it doesn't have to be a major breakdown. It has to be simple, right? But like something that says, this is school, this goes to the city of Manitowoc, something very simple, because truthfully, no one cares. Oh, I shouldn't say no one cares. Very few people care about terminology like mill rate.
Right.
And nor do they understand nor care about understanding it. They just want to know where their dollars are going. And I think that that's going to be the key for all of this. If we want to go to referendum, which is obvious we need to do, but if we want to have our community members understand why we're doing this, how much of their money is going toward it and going toward our school versus other areas, I think that is key. So, simplify, as they say. Oh gosh, I sound like I'm talking about Jason Bull now. I think he's affecting me. But I do think we need to simplify it for community members in that respect. There'll be a lot of people who will dig into this and want to know all of this that you've put together, but a lot of people won't. Most won't.
Yes, and Lisa Sink, with our communications would work to help assemble a one-page flyers or postcards, however we want to do that in order to communicate that to our community, our community. Yes.
Yeah, and if I could add, thanks, Kathy. I thought you made some really good points there. What I think would be helpful on that note is if, let's just take the amount that we feel that we need, right, between the experts on our staff, right, between you and Jim and whatever, just tell us what we need the next 5 years, right? And then let's just break that out like year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, and just show and again, no one knows what mill rate is, right? So I don't want to even see that word on there. I want to see hey, look, you're a taxpayer, here's the value of your house, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, 400, go up to whatever, and then just show them what that's going to break out to each year. And I just did some quick math here if I'm doing it right. The last year, it's about a $299 adder from our current mill rate, right? So if I'm doing my math right, that's really on a $100,000 house. You're paying an extra $299 for the year, right?
Yes.
On the last year, $200,000 house, $598, right? I mean, that just
sounds right.
Yeah, right. That's
No
what I'm
crunching
getting
up.
at.
Yeah, I'm trusting you calculating it.
Right. So I think if we just did that, just for every year, right? So people could see, hey, here's how this is going to impact you, right, as the taxpayer. Because no one's going to understand this. I mean, unless you're new or.
Correct. Yes, and I didn't intend for this to go to taxpayers. It's always kind of like the balance of I want you guys to know that I'm dissecting the budget, and looking at those things. And these are all those scenarios capture all the main moving parts that we really have to strongly consider when we look at our total financial picture. So, yes, so we can do that. We can have, if anyone will want to be, if you want to take a look at the proof of anything we could send out to the community, I mean, that's definitely something we can do and get your impact. I mean, get your feedback, before that stuff goes out. That's what's difficult from our vantage point. We work in the information all the time. So
one thing that was touched on, and I'm sure there's going to be questions at home and out there, was the mention of the 7 FTE. Has there been any discussion as to areas, or even if that is the number that is hard and fast as to what our needs are, based on what or even what that would look like? Anybody having those discussions currently? Is that,
Mike, is there, we're looking at defining more of a formula ratio approach to staffing for the classrooms, that is
Okay.
consistent across the district. They've done that in the past, but it's dependent upon several different factors. So that's what I can speak to and I wasn't always looped in on it. It was to a degree, but they would just make a judgment. But what we're looking at now is doing it based on a formula. So it's real cut and dry, and there's no hemming and hawing about it. The formula is what the formula is.
Right.
That also being said, that's what we would work towards. It's not to say maybe we wouldn't find that we would be able to eliminate more positions. Maybe we would have to say, oh, it's 6, So
Sure.
I don't want to, it'd be really hard to say it's exactly this. I
right,
wouldn't be able to guarantee that, but we definitely need to work as a team. And with Jamie being new on board, Mike being new on board, Jim and myself, we need to spend more time looking at that at this point. But what we end up at the sort of a critical state at is that for going to referendum, we have to finalize our amounts and have the resolution passed, the draft resolution, which was included by the 24th of January. So that's where it's hard, because you understand you want exact information on that, and we can deliver to that, but within the time frame of when that has to be passed.
understandable. And the reason for that was due to the fact that we have a decreased enrollment, and that is what you had kind of alluded to in the opening,
Yes.
was that, it doesn't come from specific, like a specific classroom.
Correct.
It's coming from a scattering of classroom.
Mhm.
And then also to the point of, getting a more processed approach, that's what we're looking to do. Okay.
I'm confident we can do that. We have the people on the team that can get that work done. That's not doubt in my mind. It's just and those amounts, to reduce that amount, were figured into all of these calculations. And I have the numbers for what it would take for us to be to 12.75 to 13. We could figure out where we'd want to go with that. What I really want to think again is back to that, linking to the results of the strategic plan. We want to support, and you also need to make sure, if we're working on trying to increase achievement scores, that we have enough people to do the work. We can certainly look at staffing as a whole from many different approaches, but we've got to make sure that we're meeting our objectives as well. So,
Angela, when would the state typically finalize their per pupil increase if they have one?
I believe they just went into session under the new term yesterday, but I'm not 100% on that. But there's a chance we wouldn't know till summer. And so we won't know this month likely, so that's the hard part, where we get stuck, where we don't know for sure when they're going to, finalize what they're going to give us. And if they would not give us the $200 per pupil, then we would just have to adjust that within our budget.
So is this figure in, we're getting this late from the state?
I figured in $200 this year per pupil and next year.
You think that's non-recent history a pretty safe, conservative estimate? Or-
I think it's pretty safe to say that, because what the talks are now is that the state has such a surplus that they will fund that, and that the approach was, districts were asked to fund through ESSER in the previous years and not given more funding because we had ESSER funding.
Yeah, which means that they didn't fund, and so the ESSER funds, which were meant to be extra funds, never really became extra funds. They were used in place of the state giving out, an increase.
We're in the same predicament that most every district will be in. You know what I mean, from an inflationary standpoint. And I didn't address the inflationary impacts in general. You know what I mean? Outside of those main salary, transportation, and insurance, health insurance. But prices of everything are going up.
Kathy, did you have something to add?
I actually just want to hand it over to Mike because he had his hand raised quite a while ago.
Oh, I can't see it on this.
Oh,
Right.
Please.
oh gosh.
I'm
Well,
gonna butt in first and pass it over.
Thank you, Kathy.
well, thank you, Kathy. I was just going to say that before Colin said that we have to look at our declining enrollment, and not doing the staffing in Manitowoc last year puts me at a little disadvantage relative to speaking to it right now at this current time. But with the declining enrollment, we're going to look at that, and as Colin said and Angela said, if you have 25 less students at the elementary level, let's just say kindergarten through 5th grade, those students are most likely going to be so spread out that we're not going to be able to benefit from one less section. But at the end of the day, what we're going to do is we're going to staff at a level that is economically responsible yet educationally sound. And if indeed, because I've been thinking already, and I haven't had this conversation with Angela, but if indeed this referendum were not to pass, what does that mean relative to the financing, the district's situation? And what does that mean relative to staffing? Because at the end of the day, boy, we don't want to be in a situation where we have to eliminate programs, because when you start eliminating staff, it can end up eliminating programs. And that's a bad day. We don't want to be there. So hopefully this will all pass. We will staff educationally sound, but yet being fiscally responsible. And this isn't my first rodeo at staffing. So I've been around, I think it's about 14 years now in 3 different districts. So this is number 4. So we'll get it done, and we'll get it done right.
Is there, so jumping up, as far as the hand, where would I have seen the hand on his? Is it cut off slightly, or I just don't want to have that happen again where I don't miss, as somebody's waiting to speak and then.
Let me just, here, I'll click on the hand, Colin.
Yeah, click on it.
It goes away.
Can you see
It
now?
goes away.
It goes away.
Oh, so I got to be staring at this screen now. All right.
Sorry.
That's
And
okay.
I don't have a hand to raise. I had to switch to my iPad because I couldn't follow along the documents that Angela had. And anyway, so I had to switch it. So I'm on my iPad right now. So one of the things too, I know this isn't really budget and finance, but it is part of what we're talking about since we're talking about FTE. And I had made some notes too as the curriculum committee chair, and Tony's on that committee also, that I think looking forward to, we're going to have to be really sensitive to adding new courses to, on our agenda, on our list, that I think it's going to have to be something we take kind of really hard looks at, and hopefully that it's something that is replacing something else, or refining classes was kind of the words that I was looking at, because this last couple of months we've added a lot of courses, and so eventually that adds up in FTE. So I think we're going to have to be really aware of what we're doing with that.
If I
Mike,
could just,
you raised your hand. Just
yeah, thank you. If I could just jump in here too, sometimes with a school the size of Lincoln High School, 1450 or whatever, that we have a wonderful comprehensive educational institution, and we offer a number of courses. However, as we're staffing and we have course requests come in, some of those courses only get, I'll just throw an arbitrary number out there, 10, 12, or 15 students.
Right.
And that becomes a really difficult decision at times as to, do we run that? Do we not run it? If it's a world language class and it's world language level 3 or 4, then it really becomes a difficult decision when you have low numbers. So my point only being is that even if we have a large course offering menu, there will still be situations where we just can't, we're not going to be able to run that because we don't have the students. And it's very unfortunate, but they're going to have to take course elective number 2 or number 3 or something of that nature. you know?
Or it may be something that we start doing more of coordinating with other colleges and, our local community centers and stuff where maybe we pay for their coursework, but we're not paying teachers for FTE. I know there's been some talk of some of that kind of thing too, like options for those kinds of students. So I just think it's something that we'll have to look at seriously between kind of curriculum and budget and finance. And I think that kind of leads into our executive meeting later about like, how do we start coordinating those different kinds of areas so that, the right and the left hand know what each other is doing, because it definitely is crossover.
That's an interesting idea, actually, is by sharing some of the curriculum with other districts, other colleges, et cetera, like where we have those programs,
We do.
they could probably get some of the, and then do we get where we get some of the money from other areas? Do we get any by them going as far as a revenue source?
We have like one class, like an autos class where we would bring students from other districts, but that doesn't, you can add homeschoolers, you can allow them to join your classes, but it's not a huge revenue source.
It's not. It's just stuff, and that's it.
When you look at programming, that also ties to your strategic plan. If you want to be a destination district, what are you offering for programming? Those are all pieces of the puzzle that are all interrelated from a funding, staffing, offering standpoint.
Does anybody else have anything further to the agenda item?
So Jim, it seems like, is it safe to assume you're on board with these numbers and you feel that this is the right amount?
I am. I do think that this is reasonable in terms of where we're at. There's, again, we're here for a purpose, and that's educate kids and raise student achievement levels. I think we recognize that we're not getting the return that we want, and so we're working on that end. But right now, we're a low revenue school district, and a lot of what we're talking about is inflationary. So I am supportive, in terms of where we're going right now.
I thought I attached, this is my error, I didn't attach it into the packet, but I just emailed you all the official, like the draft official referendum ballot, so you could see how it would read. So part of, just voting in general to push to, to forward this and push this onto the full board, we can also address the language in it if we would want to. And so right now it just lists, you have to list out the amounts by years. So 4.3 is already approved for next year. So you really have to approve the addition. Okay. So you would see in there that it's be 5.2 million for the 23-24 school year. It goes through all the amounts. But then what we need to put on there, and we want to keep it simple, it says for non-recurring purposes consisting of operational and maintenance expenses, including to maintain programs, technology, and buildings and grounds. That's what I just drafted up on there, but that could be adjusted. So, happy to answer any more questions, but what we would be looking for is for a recommendation to our vote by the Finance and Budget Committee to forward this on to the full Board of Education for approval.
I'd like to just offer another comment there, Tony, in terms of, one, this is, as Angela had mentioned early on, if we ask short and finding ourselves in need, it's a lot harder to deal with that issue than it is to deal with an issue knowing that you have the resource there, but you don't have to ask for it. You already have you have approval to go there, but you don't have to. So you can still every year scrutinize that budget and to what you're going to approve and then what you're going to levy within your limits. So you still have a lot of control in terms of making sure that you're operating efficiently and effectively through that process. So this is obviously setting some parameters in terms of how much you can go to the taxpayers for. Okay, if you're making that case, but that doesn't mean that that's automatically where you would go.
Historically,
If you're looking at your budget and then you're looking at,
historically, have we ever under levied?
That I don't know. I could figure that out.
Be an interesting
relatively
thing, 'cause
easy
if-
to think, but usually when you're a low revenue district, you levy to the max. That's the norm. I mean, that's just add a little bit more on, that's where you can still say, I want to make sure the budget meets these standards. What is the staffing? Now that we have a system in place that we can look, at our positions a little bit closer and manage those more effectively in this coming budget. So.
Angela, my only concern with the way you have this written in this email that you just sent is the jumping from the 5.2 million for next school year up to, consequently then the 11.5, 13, and so on. I think that those who maybe won't remember or aren't fully aware may wonder why we're going from 5.2 all the way to 11.5 in 1 year. Is there a way we can include the 4.3, like something about in addition to 4.3, but you know what I mean? So people understand that we're not incrementing, we're not taking a leap that's twice as much by 200% all of a sudden the year after. Is there a way to do that, you think?
I think we can, yeah. I mean, we get to word the ballot how we would like to have it worded.
Okay.
So that is up to us. It's kind of like I want to make sure that they know that we're putting it more, we're not asking for just a blank check, because that's, we're going to, yeah. So that's why I approached the wording. I looked at other referendum, just other questions that we had worded in the past. And so I thought that this would allow us to have some detail and not be too general. In our materials, like for buildings and grounds, stuff I would send out to the public would include, these are the projects we're going to be addressing. So that's the list that Chris is working on now. And
Yeah, I think that part is great. I'm just concerned about the.
I believe we can, so.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about that one leap and that the community, those who don't follow what we're talking about on a, on a consistent basis won't understand why.
Mhm. I have it marked.
Okay, thanks. Just if we can look into
Oh,
it.
thank you.
I just have one question. The scenarios of the 400, 300,000, 500, 200 at the top, is that above and beyond? I guess what I'm asking is, let's just take, for instance, the 23-24. It's 9.5. And that includes those items. Is that correct?
Yes, that
Okay.
includes that, yes.
And if you subtracted all those items from that year,
Mhm.
the rest of that money, would you say, to maintain what we're doing now and doesn't give us any more?
What I did is yes and no. What I did is I took off 3 FTE for declining enrollment, like 7 for next year in the amounts, and then 3 each of the following years.
Okay.
So it's not a total roll forward. It would adjust with the enrollment. And, because we have some surplus deficit in there too, it's just a variable we aren't sure of right now. But that's in my projections, I did take that off. So it would reflect the enrollment. That seemed like a request from last time. I adjust or make sure that I address that in the scenarios.
Because my concern would be that $500,000 for buildings and grounds, small scope projects is not enough to deal with all the issues that we have with our buildings. So then, beyond the 500,000, is there anything built into those budgets every year to address sort of a long-term need?
He has around $250,000 to $280,000 annually for larger projects. When they did an analysis about 2 years ago, and when I looked again, when you look at his so that would it would be, so he would be around $8,000 a year, but that would still only create a little bit of product.
Yeah, can you mute one of your mics, please?
What I could have for Sue too,
Carry or Kath?
Kathy.
Okay.
well, she's trying to figure that. And I didn't, when I gave him this, I said, okay, for the referendum, I want you to give me a list, and I made a spreadsheet so we can have it just perfect where we can say, this is it, you know?
Yeah.
And have it in an easy to present fashion. I didn't include that 200,000, but that would easily, I mean, it's amazing. It only takes a couple projects and all of it's accounted for.
Sure. So, I mean, that would even, let's just say that only gets us up to about 700,000,
Mhm.
right? So is it, do we foresee in the future, one of these years that we're also going to have to go to
Yes.
for a, I forget what they're called.
Capital.
Capital, thank you. Capital referendum.
Yes.
Okay.
I just really feel strongly in looking at our buildings and grounds budgets and, you know, listening to and seeing what needs are district-wide, that we aren't allotting enough in our general budget to just kind of try to stay ahead of some of that stuff. So, and we're at a critical mass type with that, but we really, you know, we need more information and time to adjust the larger capital portion. And so this is, I guess, a way to start positioning our regular budget to overall to put us in a better spot. You know, same thing with the technology, the infrastructure is like 1.5 to $2.2 million every 5 years. Part of the plan with this would be that we would put that money into Fund 46 and then have that money when we would need it to fund that project. Otherwise, if you'd randomly say, oh, this year $2 million is out for this, well, then you have to cut a bunch of from your other parts of your budget. But this way we can more proactively plan for that money, let interest help us out a little bit on that, and address some of those needs without like huge waves of impact and impact on the budget that are not positive for it. So really, really trying to position us better with this as well, so.
And just a little further clarification on what
Yes.
Stacy was asking,
Oh,
where she
okay.
specifically was referencing the building there in terms of the 500,000, this
Yes.
500,000 above what we've already allocated, which is approximately 200, correct?
Correct, yes.
So that's 700. So with all the other categories, there is an allocation already in there. It's just
Mhm.
not seen as adequate.
Yes,
Okay,
Yes.
and so all of those
Technology.
4 categories would be increasing from an amount to a
correct.
higher amount,
Mhm.
just so that we have a clear
Yes.
understanding.
So we'd have 750 approximately a
Mhm.
year being given instead of a $250,000.
Correct.
This
And
is
tech-
again, something that, should be, definitely clear in a budget review and stuff like this.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, and the technology department already has a plan that says, over the 5 years, this is gonna be our replacement cycle. Because after we replaced or approved replacing these computers, we said like, gotta have something. And they're happy to help with that, and the nice thing is, I see today is 2 years since I arrived in the district. And so when I look at now, where we are now and where we were, we just are more defined and planned out. And, part of that just me getting settled into the position and having a better grasp and understanding of our budget and everything. But it's just our district thinking more intentionally about what our financial needs are. So I really feel confident with my calculations and with the direction and the connection with the strategic plan and all things considered. So,
Good.
No.
Tony, you good?
I think I'm good for now.
Okay. Kathy?
Yep.
All right. So, one of the, items for the agenda was that, they were seeking a resolution.
yes, it would be to approve the amounts, and to push this, or I shouldn't say push, to forward this on to the board for final approval.
Okay. Do we have a motion, for, the spring 2022 or 2023, my apologies, referendum information recommendation, provided by the finance director?
I'd like to make a motion, to table that vote. And my reasoning for that is as follows. I'd like a little bit more time to fully digest all this. It's just a lot of information. And what I'd like to do or propose is that we have another meeting. I'm suggesting the 18th or whenever, prior to the next meeting that we have to vote on it, where we can have some of these follow-up items, that we talked about, cleaned up, that we could review, including just the impact of the taxpayer in layman's terms.
Okay.
I would also suggest that, if we are going to be seeking this amount of funding from taxpayers, that we consider putting some restrictions on where that money is going. It seems like we are, to some extent, in the language that I'm reading on the ballot that I just read that you sent out. But
Mhm.
I would also like to broaden that language to include that, just some of the mistakes that the district has made in the past, that we're not going to be moving down that road again, right? So not to beat a dead horse, but that Darude contract is an example of, where funding was spent unwisely and proved to be not a good fit for our district. So I'm not exactly sure what that language would look like, but I'd like to take a little bit more time to, I wouldn't be doing the service to all the people that voted for me if I just blindly passed this without making sure that we were spending the money wisely.
Okay. There is a motion to table. Is there a second?
I'll second just for sake of discussion.
Okay.
I know Tony kind of made his point, but I guess I'd like to hear from others. I don't necessarily follow that train of thought.
Well, so we have a motion and a second. Opening it up to discussion. Kathy, you said it doesn't follow your train of thought?
No, I guess I'm concerned. I think no matter what, we need this funding in order to move forward. I think, to put it in kind of a visual, to me, for many, many years now, we're treading water and we need to go someplace. And that's, to me, what this is about, is having a referendum that allows us to move forward and to move forward for our students and those who work here. So we have buildings over their heads and so forth and so on. And I think a lot of those things have been pushed off for a lot of years. Is what we've been talking about. So I don't really think that we are spending unnecessary funds, but I guess I don't feel like Darude is much of an equation in this. I mean, I get what you're getting at, Tony, but I feel like we're under a time frame here too. We have to make a decision in a very short time here, and it has to go to full board. We have one full board discussion or one full board meeting, I think, coming up, right? January 10th. And I don't know that we have another one before the January 23rd deadline. Plus, remember, we do have Wisconsin WASB conference in between there, where many of us will be attending. So, I'm concerned with the timing of this.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't we voting on this on the 24th?
As a full board.
That's the last day that it's possible to vote on it, to meet the 70-day window. And so that's the day of I would recommend that we vote on it ahead of time, just to, just from a safety standpoint.
Right.
I mean, it's the will of the board, what you guys want to do, I'm happy to support with that. I guess from a budget perspective, I feel like I've done a thorough job of going through and doing the calculations and stuff. So I think looking at how we present it to the community, and how we would package it, that's proofing a document and packaging it and making sure it's in an understandable format. With all due respect, I think that I'm happy to get more information and word it other ways. That's not a problem at all, but I just don't know that it's going to change the result of the recommendation a whole lot more at this point.
Well, with all due respect, I think that if we don't get broad community support, this could fail.
For sure, for
Right.
sure.
Tony,
And
I get what you're saying, like you want more time to absorb it. It is a lot of information. We
Yeah.
all need that. But I think in order to move forward, first of all, we're only moving it forward to the full board. So it can be a whole nother discussion with the full board, where it still can have amounts change. And that could easily already, we could say it's a pull-out item and not even have it in our full minute. You know what I mean? Oh, it is the one item for this meeting. But I mean, we can already pull that out for discussion specifically.
Well,
But I'm
Could-
worried about the timeline.
would it be possible, I think it's possible that we would even just not give it a motion in a second tonight and bring it to the full board unless it's the preference to have it come from committee. I know that's what we're working towards as a goal. But that's, I mean, I don't want to interrupt any process or progress towards those goals, but that would be another option too. And then we can schedule the meetings. I'm happy to do that.
Right, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying, Kathy, so I agree that, you know, we do need to do this. What I'm reluctant to do is just, you know, not make sure that we have some mechanism in place so that we don't repeat mistakes of the past, right? And I think that's reasonable. If we're gonna go to taxpayers and say, hey, just give us $65 million, like, trust us, right? You know, and you know, we all want to do the right thing and we all want to support all the kids and our staff and, you know, do all the things that we talked about in our strategic plan. But I think that for some voters, you know, they're going to need more reassurance. And that's, you know, I want this to pass. I want this to be successful. I think we all do. And that's where my thinking's at is, you know, how do we garner the most support in the community to make sure that we're really going to be focusing on and addressing all the issues that concern everybody, right? And everyone wants good public schools, right? That impacts all of us. So that's where my head's at. And on the other note too is, and maybe we just move the dates of the meetings then. I was under the impression that we were going to be voting on this on Tuesday, the 24th as a full board. And that if we had a meeting on the 18th, we could still meet that timeline without really jeopardizing anything. But if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like that might not be the case.
Yeah, can I jump in, Angela? The 18th, we're going to be at conference at WASB.
Yeah.
Or we can do another date then before the, you know,
Yeah,
whatever. We'll work
But I
on.
get what you're saying, Tony, and I totally agree with you about, like, you know, garnishing the support and so forth. But a mechanism to be like show the public that we are setting parameters on the spending can really be done at any time. This is really strictly about what amounts are we going to referendum for, and if we're going to referendum. I mean, it's really what it boils down to this vote, correct? Am I not correct? Please correct me.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean,
So,
yeah.
so let me recap a little bit here. So Tony, you're asking for it to be tabled, and the reason that you want it to be tabled is so that we can put a better proposal to the voting public as to what the language would be surrounding the referendum. One, two, a clearer picture as to the money allocations of the referendum. And did I miss one? They're primarily those two, correct?
Yeah, and those are both PR things.
And I could put it in the resolution, you know, to address inflationary impacts. And, you know, the 500,000 for this. I mean, I could do that. You know, you wouldn't want to, I mean, this all has to go on the ballot. So that's where you wouldn't list, that would go out more on the information that we would provide to the public. So, I know what you're saying about the impact. The impact would for sure go on that. The mill rate, some people do fixate on the mill rate. I can say, well, like one of the things I learned in business manager school is mill rate. But how it equates to your tax bill and how it affects with assessments and all that stuff is very valid as well. So, I mean, that they both can be put in there and meet the needs of people who wonder about both. So.
And I was just going to say to kind of answer, Tony, your question is, this is so if it comes out of committee today, it goes to the 7th and so our meeting next week. Sorry, yes, 10th. And the reason for that is because of this deadline that we have. So the numbers, if you're okay with the numbers and go in the actual process of going to a referendum, then we have until April, right?
We start communicating over the time,
Correct.
yeah, as soon as we want to.
Right.
Yeah, next
And
community.
what you guys could do is to say that, yes, we agree with the numbers. Yes, we want to move forward with the referendum. And before you send anything out, let's have it come back to our committee and look at it to make sure it's sending the kind of message we want to.
Okay.
Because I think those are the two different things.
Yeah.
So if you don't need more time to look at like the numbers, like you're like, okay, I trust that these numbers are right. I don't need any more information about that, or that you're not convinced yet that we need to go to a referendum, then I could see, but again, that may still be the case, but I just wanted to point out that's what it's a timing issue of that. We have to do this within the 70 days to even have it be put on the ballot. So,
It's a
So I just
timing,
wanted to clarify
It's a timing, and it's also very early on where you're building, you're making this request with a lot of assumptions. From,
Right.
state aid to property tax value increases to, there's, you're doing your best, to estimate, what that possibility might be. Again, you have control, with budget details. Also the messaging, in terms of how making sure that it's clear, in terms of why you're requesting this. Myself, I feel very comfortable that there's a lot of control. Obviously, that's up to the board, with administration, to make sure that we're fulfilling our responsibilities. We get stewards of public money.
I think sometimes it'll feel like from the board perspective, that approving these amounts, it proves that that's what the budget is. That's not the case.
That's right.
Still always have the ultimate
Right.
oversight, for all the budget. So that's important to know. So.
Right. And again, I hear what you're saying, and I agree with the dollar amount, so I'm good with that. I think my concern is more long-term.
Right.
If we're gonna write this blank check for $65 million, and, let's just be honest, we've seen some unwise spending, years past. So I don't want to look back at this, maybe like 3 or 4 years if I'm out on the board and say, gee, I wish I would have, put something in place that would have prevented that, or, could have at least made sure the money was being spent on literacy programs or
Right, and I
stuff
think-
that's.
and I think the only way that we can do that, and again, I wish and maybe it will be, but I wish our budgeting process was a lot longer. I feel like when the budget comes, it's like,
Rush.
right, I can't even wrap my head around that part. So, I mean,
I think that's critical.
yeah, my dream, so to speak, would be everything now gets run through the strategic plan, right? And if everything we go back to, if we're going to invest in this, what is our return, right? We haven't been doing that. And so we've now set a process in place that we have to hold our superintendents accountable, and have them hold everyone else accountable to do that. That's where this comes. It's saying when that budget comes, going, what is this? Or when someone's asking for something, again, when somebody was talking about courses, a lot of the courses sound great and fun and wonderful. Again, though, are they in line with all those 20 that we passed or whatever? And I'm not criticizing them at all, but are they meeting our achievement goals? Are they meeting our reading goals? Are they meeting our math goals? And I think, those are the places where we really need to hone in on, that I don't think historically that, we've had those mechanisms in place, right? I mean, I think I've heard sometimes, right, the budgets should start yesterday. right? We're already looking at those things. And again, I think I think our whole goal of our board is to try to, how do we streamline things to always go back to that accountability? So I don't think it doesn't really affect this as much as it does when we get down to saying, okay, now we have the ability, you see, here's my fear. We have the ability to collect $17 million. But how many people have the stomach to say, we're going to take the 17 million, right? Because we could get this and we could get this and we could get this. I mean, that's going to be where the rubber meets the road. And I would find it very hard to believe that we've ever given the money back or didn't take it or whatever.
Yeah, some districts in the state do.
That would be
But we
awesome.
haven't- Yeah,
And that would show very good stewardship of our money.
and I would say even just looking at the FTE ratio alone, from an enrollment perspective, you know, and in my hopes and my desires to get a longer budget process and really deliberate is much is a change alone compared to what we've done historically.
Mhm,
So, because
right.
usually in November, December, you're starting to look at enrollment and you know, while we didn't start that early, we're doing it earlier instead of saying, well, this is what our staffing is. Oh, now what are we going to do for the budget? You know, so we're
Right.
already, we can have a plan and goals and targets and metrics to look at as we approach the budget and staffing. So,
Correct. Right.
so. And Tony, I'd be happy to include you in on the meetings too, if you'd like to, when we talk about what, you know, what we put together for the public or, you know, or include you in drafts, whatever you would like. I mean, I'm happy to do any of that. That's not a problem.
So we do also have a motion on the table, to table. So we do need to, put that to a vote. If that being said, is there any further discussion to the motion currently?
So how long would we have, I guess, to get all the details in place? If, let's just say we pass it tonight, we vote on it, yeah, we're gonna go for referendum on Tuesday, hypothetically. At what point, is there a point of, no return, like this is it, like you can't make any adjustments before it goes to the public, or how does that work?
We would want the resolution to reflect what would be on the ballot
Yeah.
when you vote on it Tuesday night, you know,
Yeah.
so like my goal is to mainly have the numbers in place and we can work on the language, we can work on that and then post that by Friday, you know, Monday, as an attachment so that you would know exactly what's going to be shared there. And then the materials that would be shared with voters, sort of the informational piece of it would be developed within a week or so, and we would send a press release out likely saying we've approved to go for operational referendum in spring. And then we would follow up. We would have a whole plan really that we would have times to talk to and educate voters, like either online, in person, or a combination of that. And really, you know, the administrators, Jim, myself, I mean, I would go out into the public and speak with groups and stuff. There's a lot of, you know, a lot of work that comes with it. So finalizing the resolution is really the first step, and then really educating your public and ensuring you have, you know, hopefully their support for the vote is the work. There's a lot, it's a heavy lift what comes after that.
So really, if I heard you right, like we have to have this finalized by Monday, and after Monday, we can't make any changes to it when it goes to a vote. As far as like putting any restrictions on where and how that money can be spent, or in general, like spending.
The board always has the oversight of the budget. You know what I mean? So we can,
Right, but
yeah,
you know, I hear what you're saying, but I
but for the
guess,
freezing, yes.
yeah,
Mhm.
you know, the board might look different in 5 or 6 years, right?
Correct.
And so that's the thing where, you know, we're just kind of writing this blank check for,
I'm just trying to prevent any of the disasters.
Yeah, I mean,
mistakes that
let me
have been
give you-
made in the past by prior boards.
well, let me give you an example too. Look at like and this isn't happening here, thank God, but you know, when you look at some of the sex ed curriculum in other districts in our state, like some of the things they're doing with kindergartners, like personally, as a board member and someone who campaigned, you know, against that type of thing, I would never want to know that anything I approved, like funding, could have been used to introduce that, right?
Mhm.
So And like I said, not happening now, but like, I'm just trying to think of, what could go wrong, right? And how do we prevent that? How do we, my vision of Manitowoc as a destination district includes, kids that can read proficiently, do math proficiently, and are, at or above state averages. It doesn't, right? So that's really where I'm getting at is how do we, before we just greenlight this funding, that could be used in ways that might go against what I would want. I want to make sure that, and frankly, what people who voted for me want, how do we ensure reasonable safeguards to make sure that the focus is going to be channeled in an area that's going to benefit all of our students and our community.
Yeah, no, I hear you 100%. I think just the vehicle with which that's done is more through, we can put some detail in the language of the resolution itself that goes to the voters, the actual question.
Yeah.
But really your oversight comes through the budget process. That unless, and I understand what you're saying. You want to feel safe.
I would also say, one of
Jess,
the questions
I'm gonna
that
have
you're,
to bring this back a little bit too, is because we do actually have a motion on the table and kind of we're a little bit out of order too. So we should actually either pull back the motion for further discussion, or we should take this vote and discussion is over. So I would just remind you guys that we do have a motion on the table that we do have to either speak to the motion or we have to put this to a vote. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, Superintendent File. I'm just trying to keep some sort of get on
I
track.
think you are kind of speaking the
And
motion,
Jamie-
right? If we have to vote on this next Tuesday, I got to understand it, right? So.
And I agree. I'm just saying, so like, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you have a motion on the table, it really should be just the board that is speaking to the motion. Is this correct? Am I wrong in saying that?
I don't think anybody could speak.
Okay, I mean, I'm trying to go off of for previous practices, so, all right, well then I will let the continuation of the discussion go further. So, all right, so I didn't even mean to interrupt you.
I was just, one of the things I would just, have the board recognize that, sometimes, as you try to clarify, you can complicate. If you add too much into something, of a resolution, versus a budget process that you're going to be examining something in much detail, where that's a whole nother process. So that's the only thing that I would also, be aware of, in terms of if you have a 2-page ballot, that could create more confusion than anything. That's built for kind of a concise communication. So I mean, there's some other things in there, to the extent of, again, I'm thinking in terms of what you're attempting to do is set some parameters now in terms of what your taxing authority might be able, to go to. But that oversight,
Can we do that versus via the referendum ballot question? A lot of those same things.
Through the question or
Yes.
through the material?
We could
Well,
state some of the, like, so say the two of the things that Tony has concerns over, and his reasons for tabling were the allocation and the referendum verbiage. So if we were to, state in the referendum ballot, because we can put anything we want in there, we could state, the exact allocations, and we could state referendum verbiage, as committee or the board deems appropriate and necessary.
I would, if I were to make a recommendation, I would recommend, like I put the buildings and grounds, technology and that stuff in general. I think if we start putting dollar amounts by them, we can do whatever we want with it. But as Jim had mentioned, then they're gonna say, well, I thought, is that $200,000 in addition to that? Or is that like, what is the amount that I'm voting?
I understand what
for?
you're saying here.
So I'm just.
And I still don't think that would, I'll say would satisfy. I don't think that speaks to what Tony's trying to accomplish. I almost think, Tony, what you're talking about is, you know, there needs to be policy on what sexual ed looks like. You know, I think that's a policy thing that's going to be
Oh, it's my
an
apologies.
ever living document. And because I don't know, it's not, it wouldn't be in referendum language because it's so broad. And when we use the word operational, whoever approves that budget, if they want this amount of operational to go to something that, you know, the previous board 5 years prior to that, you know, they can just change it
Right.
by vote.
I think I was kind of thinking the same thing too. I mean, no matter what language you put in there, you gotta realize that we are overseeing of the budget. So if we want to change anything at that point in time, or in 5 years, we have all different people on here. If they want to change it, we're just gonna change it. It's nothing-
That's the reality of allowing people to vote people into these positions, right? They vote them in based on their belief systems, and we really can't do anything about that, guys. I mean, it'd be great if we could all say like our own
Yeah, Tony.
thoughts were going to be carried on for decades. That's not really true at all.
But
You have
I
your-
think you do that with policy.
Yeah, it's all with policy, and then they can change that at any point in time too, really.
But we really need to get back to our motion.
Can,
Yep.
can I add one more thing in here? I promise. What the other language, and maybe this simplifies it, yet puts more maybe what you're looking for in the end, or in the past, they would say, you know, $4.3 million annually for each of the school years. It has to list the amount per year in the years, but for the purposes of operational needs of the school district as determined by the school board from time to time. So it says that it's a school board. So I thought instead of putting that in there to put more what it was for, just throwing that out. So
Jamie, and
I know
then
Jamie's
we're,
been waiting patiently. Sorry, Jamie.
What I was going to address is maybe we'll address some of Tony's concern. And that is like when we create a curriculum map or a building and grounds schedule that is transparent and addresses what budgetary needs we're going to have over a period of time, I think that's going to address more even the community needs. So they know, like, for example, with curriculum mapping right now, I can look at it and say social studies needs to be next. And I can't give you the exact dollar amount, but I can tell you we're going to have to look at an adoption because the materials we have are more than 15 years old. And I think if we can get into that cyclical type planning more than a year in advance, then I think it's going to be more comforting because you're going to know in advance what we're going to be looking at spending.
does anybody have anything further to the motion? All right. There's a motion on the table to table the current referendum question or request to move it to the general board. And actually, Tony, I'm just going to have you, I'm not going to put words. Do you want to speak? Do you want to recap your motion, please?
I had a motion on the floor to put some restrictions on the spend, what it can be allocated for on the referendum dollars. And, you know, basically just limiting what we could spend it on to ensure it's being focused on the areas that we need it.
Okay.
But you know, after hearing Stacy's comments, I think that, you know, this could probably be addressed more on the policy level.
Okay.
So I think I'd be okay withdrawing that motion if that's acceptable to everybody.
Understandable. Kathy, you're all right.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I would love to withdraw it too. I was under the impression it was more about postponing it so Tony could understand it before he voted. So
Okay. All right. So then that being said, we are still seeking a motion for the agenda item. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion to
Okay.
proceed to the full board.
We have a motion to forward this on to the full board for the discussion at the January 10th meeting. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right. We have a first and we have a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right. Motion will be forwarded on to the full board. And that is the only agenda item that we have for today. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Make the motion?
Motion by Kathy,
Yes.
seconded by Tony. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. All right.
Thanks, guys. See you at the next meeting.
Hi, Kathy. And are we doing an exec?
Yeah.
Yes.
She's bringing Jamie, but she's gotta go to a different meeting.
Oh, got another meeting.
Yep, yep.
All right.
And,
It's just you and me.
Yeah.
No, she's gotta go into a different meeting, but she's in the.
Oh,
finance
duh,
meeting.
yeah, right, yeah, okay.
Well, one second.